Okay, good morning everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people from the UK, from Norway, from Sweden here. I think you get to the stage with these conferences where it feels like you've been planning it for so long that it might never happen. So it's total delight to be here today and to be representing the UK and the Supergen Bioenergy Hub and to see so many people who have travelled from the UK for this. I've been working with Duncan in particular in Bio4Fuels since they started really on this programme, and there is huge overlap between what we're trying to do in the UK and what's going on in Norway and also what's going on in Sweden. So I think we've got a lot to learn from each other over the coming day or two, and hopefully long beyond that. So I want to talk to you a little bit just to give background on the UK, why we're here, why we're interested in this space. When we look at bioenergy from a UK perspective, it's very different to Norway and Sweden. We don't have your forest base, we don't have your land base. It's a very different picture. And yet still when we look at the resources and look at the modelling that we can do around that and what we can mobilise, we work out that the UK actually could have 45% of its primary energy demand delivered by bioenergy if we wanted. My centre doesn't just focus on biofuels, we look at bioelectricity, bio-CCS and heating as well. So part of the issue here is around how we split that up. And one possible scenario is we reckon that in the UK we could have biomass providing around 10% of baseload electricity, alongside say 50% of heat, with a big focus there on the industrial demand and the gas demand that will ultimately need to be replaced. But there's also a big role remaining for liquid fuels. And the areas that we've looked at are suggesting that something of the order of 20% of the liquid fuel demand could be sustainably met. The question remains whether we should be prioritising aviation or shipping or other heavy-duty plant among that. And that's something that we come back to again and again in our discussions in the UK. The way the market is moving at the moment, in the near term, Supergen and the whole of the UK's bioenergy industry is really focused around what we have at present. Around 8% of the UK's electricity comes out of one power station, Drax Power Station, which has converted to be predominantly biomass in recent years and imports a huge amount of that as millions of tonnes of wood from overseas every year. So having that base load power on our system is still important to us. And the history that we have around the stability of generation that we get from those large-scale power stations at a time when our nuclear fleet is actually coming of an age where it needs to be replaced is really important. So there is a role for biomass still in the UK in terms of baseload power generation. When we do that, though, we need to be looking at greater flexibility to sit alongside renewables moving forward. In the medium term, if we are looking particularly at rapid decarbonisation and looking at the tighter commitments around the Paris agenda, then we need to be looking at liquid fuels that are lower in carbon. And therefore, this is where biofuels come in, the fungible hydrocarbons, and the challenges there are around the novel technologies that we need in order to be able to improve the efficiency and the carbon efficiency of production. In the long term, the UK has looked last year, and I will talk more at length about this in my presentation this afternoon on sustainability, but we looked last year at the long-term future and the role of bio within a decarbonised economy in the UK, and it's clear that there is frankly no room for carbon atoms to be released into the atmosphere by the time we get to 2050. That means that in the longer term, the routes that lead through to hydrogen and gasification and or carbon capture and storage are actually key from a UK perspective. So negative emissions and the pathways to that become incredibly important. Sustainability is also really important, and I put this graph up. This was done as part of a report that I wrote for Government Office and Science many years ago. I'll try to just quickly explain that I'm taking the same land area on both of these. I'm producing different amounts of biomass. The top line is a first generation crop. The bottom line is second generation. You'll all be familiar with this. But the really important thing to note is that we can get conversion efficiencies here, which are just as high for first generation and for second generation. The key thing is that for the second generation crops, we are converting a much larger proportion of the material that we are growing. We are making much more efficient use of the resource that we have available. And this is why technology and conversion, yes, is really important, but it's important that we don't obsess with the efficiency of that, and that instead we look back at the whole system. So within Supergen, which I'll show you in a moment, we look at the conversion and the technology, but we also bring that systems perspective into play. The second thing I want to emphasize is that Supergen is focused on delivering our climate targets, yes, but it's about more than carbon dioxide. This is another graph which I use an awful lot, difficult to explain in a short version, but essentially this circle here is looking at sustainability and risk. And we're looking here at the difference between a fossil system, which is this blue one, and if I put it really simply, if I'm making that blue system more sustainable, I'm stretching the circle. What's superimposed on top of it is a biofuel that is imported from an Argentinian source in this particular case. And what you see is that some things get better and some things get worse when we switch from fossil fuels to biofuels. Now, this sounds like common sense, but it's something that we forget all the time because we obsess around this one, the climate, which is really, really important, and we forget the rest. We forget the air quality, which is a top priority in the UK at the moment. We forget what we're doing to land use. We forget about eutrophication. We forget about people. And so it's really important to remember that sustainability is a balancing act, and that is key to the heart of what we do in Supergen. So, from a UK perspective, what are our top priorities? Carbon budget. We've put this into law. We must meet this. This must happen. I've just said the other one, sustainability beyond carbon, looking at land use in that wider context. For us, the security and the confidence that we are being sustainable with our imports is a really, really important issue because we do not have the land to be able to produce it on our own. And that leads to the fourth item, that the governance frameworks that we can put in place around these need to be really sensible, risk-focused, incentivize the best, recognize the trade-offs, and deal with institutional capacity, meeting people where we are in terms of their status around the world and not imposing impossible things on producer nations. So that brings me to almost my final slide where I look at Supergen. We have quite a different structure to the other two centres here. We look at a whole system, starting with resources, through pre-treatment and conversion, to the energy vector, be that the biofuel, the aviation fuel, the hydrogen, the gas, whatever it is which is delivering. And we have a cross-cutting set of work on case studies. We're also very heavily focused on our partners, on engagement, and on bringing that policy, industry, research triangle together. So the final slide, a selection of our partners here. And I think that you will see a lot more from us in the coming day or two. Please take an opportunity to look at all the posters that we have outside and to connect with us on social media as we move forward. Thank you.